The Upper Peninsula of Michigan is a historic place. Back in the 19th century, it had double the population it has today. Many people in Michigan look fondly on the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, but just like any other place that's been touched by humans, there's also a dark history. And the dark history of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan isn't really in a lot of history books. But the only governor of Michigan that came from the UP, Chase Osborne, wrote a little bit about its dark history. And if you dig deep enough, you can find a lot of stories. And one story survives about the good people of Fayette, Michigan. This is a story about ordinary citizens who rose up to destroy the criminal gang. I'm Chuck.
I'm Poppins.
The channel's Restless Viking. Let's explore this story.
Oh, when I was young, before the war was won, I wanted the metal, the hollow machine, oh, the mighty guns.
In 1864, the railroad came here, and then by 1867, the first furnace was built. So having this plant, this factory, having this process on Lake Michigan, they were able to get the pig iron to the metropolitan areas of Chicago and Detroit much easier than using Lake Superior. So this is where the railroad came in. They also had a machine shop, blacksmith shop. The company store is down here. So the superintendent lived up there along with the elite. The machinists worked and lived here. And then the laborers lived up on the hill in log cabin. And the doctor lived here. So this is the 19-room hotel. Here they had the music hall and the meeting place.
But the story we're going to tell about the good people of Fayette was a dark one. And it was relayed to us by a lady named Adele Elliott, who was a resident of the area during those times. Adele describes Fayette as being a place of good citizens, of upstanding citizens. And in fact, they wouldn't let any bars in Fayette except for the one that was at the hotel. And even though they kept the saloons and the houses of ill out of Fayette, saloons and stockades started popping up outside of town. But Miss Elliott also describes Fayette as being a town that was being overcome by stockades and saloons. The stockades were where they kept the sex slaves, where they forced young ladies to perform. And many of the men of Fayette had families, wives and children, and they were blowing their money on drinking, gambling, song, and women. And that was a problem. But then in August of 1880, a young girl escaped from a stockade owned by a man named Jim Summers in Sac Bay. And she wandered for 2 days until she got to Fayette. And she tried to take refuge with the deputy sheriff. But soon, outside of his house, Jim Summers was waiting with a buggy, and she was brought back to the stockade. So the citizens of Fayette realized that they couldn't trust those that were appointed to uphold the law for them.
And so the citizens of Fayette had a meeting, and they were gonna make it right.
So the crowd was pretty riled up, and they grabbed anything that could be a weapon, mop handles, tools, a rolling pin, or a washer, and they went to go purge Summers' gang. They headed east from Fayette about a mile to the bar of a pig iron Fred, and they dispatched him. And I don't know, there's no record, but I think it's safe to assume they killed some of them. And then they headed south 6 miles to Sac Bay. There isn't much that we can find from Sac Bay, but there are some old buildings. There's a small cemetery. And there's a little county park. So they got to the stockade here at Sac Bay, and they laid waste to the place. They burned it down and they destroyed everything, and they freed the girls. And as for Jim Summers, they beat him to a bloody pulp, and they left his body here on the beach because they knew he was gonna die. But the mystery of all this is, when his friends came back to give him a proper burial the next day, he was gone. And that's the story of the Sac Bay Stockade and the citizens of Fayette showing people what citizens can do when they really need to do it. I'm Chuck
I'm Poppins.
from Fayette and Sac Bay, Michigan. Thanks for coming along. We'll catch you next time.